down here to go to work, and he'd drive by real fast in his truck when he would leave, primarily in front of Chris's house. So, you know, if it was Chris that was harassing him all the time, well, Dean continued that harassment because he was doing a majority of what he accused Chris of doing, if that makes any sense. Dean created a lot of problems, which is why I told Dean to leave my house. I still haven't had any problems really with Chris. One of the things that Dean told the police in the audio recording that I listened to, he said, well, Paul doesn't have any use for Chris either. And I don't know how Dean would know what Paul knows about his interactions or relationship with Chris. If anybody knows me, I really don't go out of my way to be around people. I don't go out of my way to be friends with people. On this block, I know Chris, and I know the guy that crosses the street, and I know one of the guys down the street because I used to live next to him. And the only person, I want to state this pretty hard, the only person that's ever come to my house, ever, really, to say hi or to talk about issues going on in the neighborhood, because Chris is the guy in the neighborhood that takes care of, you know, when the street needs to be repaired, when they were doing the ditch digging out here, when the city was out here trying to improve the ditches, which they just did more harm than good. Chris is the one that's out here in this community making sure that our community on Stainback Court is taken care of, and he's the one that stands up to the city, and he's the one that brings up all these issues. And yes, I work with Chris on some political movements as well, and Chris is the one that helps, and Chris is the one that people call around here when they need something from the city. We also had issues with drones. That was a big thing with Dean. And I said the law is you can't do anything about it unless he's recording, and then you have to prove that he's recording. So I told Dean, I said, leave it alone about the drones. Well, he wouldn't leave it alone about the drones, and he got everybody stirred up with drones. And Chris and I had conversations about the drones, and I told Chris personally, as my neighbor, I said, I don't really appreciate, not the right word, I don't like it when people fly drones over my house, and I'd appreciate it if you would not do it if you could see fit. And Chris still flies the drone whenever he wants because it's legal. And when the drone issue first came up, what the police should have done was came out here and talked to the people that had the problems with the drone and tell them that what Chris is doing is legal. And if you keep messing with Chris about illegal activity, you are then harassing him. And what happened was Chris ended up with several people on this block that was harassing him over illegal activity. Right? This is America. Can we have illegal activity that people can do without everybody getting in an uproar and starting problems here and there? You know, I watched the video with Dean and the police officer, and the police officer brought up, man, and this really shocked me. The police officer started bringing up some of the past stuff between Chris and the guy down the street that was harassing Chris, and I think Chris won a lawsuit about it because the guy was seriously harassing him, and he would drive by the house, he would drive the car or drive his truck closer to the house when he passed Chris's house, like he was going to run into the yard or he was going to do something to intimidate Chris and his family. Well, you know, I stayed out of that for the most part because I didn't want to get involved. And then what happened was the guy down the street who was harassing Chris started doing it to my daughter. All right? So what he was doing to Chris, he started doing to my daughter, and I don't even know why he was doing it to my daughter. But the harassment that he was giving Chris, he was starting in on my daughter, following her very closely down the road as she was driving, and she come home and she was scared to death, and she knows that family. So the things that he was doing to Chris, yeah, he was doing to other people, my family included. But when you listen to the police officers talk, this one in particular that was talking to Dean, I mean, how can you be a police officer and how can you keep an open mind about what's going on in the community if you're sitting here telling somebody in the community that Chris, almost crosses the line of the law with the things he does? And I was so disappointed in the Red Oak Police Department during this entire time that Chris dealt with this guy down the street. And the guy down the street had a neighbor that was in on it with him, and he had a neighbor across the street that was in on him with it, and nobody else on the street, none of the other neighbors would stand up and defend Chris in any of this stuff, myself included, because I didn't want to get involved. Well, when it was to the point where I did get involved because it was happening to my family, it was too late. The police officers had already decided that Chris was the bad guy based on another incident which the Red Oak Police Department did nothing to resolve, and the Sheriff's Department had to come in and resolve that, So let's talk about Chris. How many more years is the Red Oak Police Department going to talk about Chris when it was the Red Oak Police Department that didn't do their job that caused this thing to drag on and on and on and on until I got involved? And then, come to find out, the guy that was causing all this harassment ended up with cancer and died. And guess what? Yeah, this street's been pretty calm since then. But we still, as our police department still has to stand up and talk about Chris and how bad Chris is and how Chris almost breaks the law, and he just does things to harass people. Well, if you're doing something like flying a drone, which is totally legal, and the police department's got to talk about the citizen that's doing illegal activity like they're a crook, then there's something wrong with our police department. That's what I think. So I still live at this address, December 2022. Chris and I get along very well. Chris is, this is kind of funny, but Chris and I are friends. So that's kind of my little history with Chris Moses and what Dean was doing on the street. And if Chris was harassing Dean, then I didn't see it. I didn't see it that way. And I didn't really see it that way because I told Dean after he started having issues early on with Chris and talking bad about Chris and all this, and so I told him, I said, leave him alone. Stop talking to him. Stop going into his yard. Stop dealing with him. But he couldn't. He couldn't stop. He couldn't stop. He's the one that always initiated these issues with Chris. And as a man in this world, had Dean done that to me, I would have done the exact same thing that Chris did. If somebody would have cut off part of a tree, or if somebody would have started digging the roots out of the ground of my tree, I think I would have had issues. If somebody would have, taken stuff and poured it along the fence to try to get a reaction from the dogs, I would have had issues with that because that's Chris's livelihood. I don't know the details on that, but Dean did stuff in the dog area in the back. Yeah, this isn't a court of law, and I'm not here to prove anything. I'm just here to tell you my opinions about what happened, my thoughts, what I saw, what I heard. And when I started hearing about him trying to scare the community by firing off weapons in the backyard, and when he shot at Chris's son, I really don't care what Chris's son did. Trespassing is not a shooting offense by a citizen in this state. And I think Dean found that out. So bottom line is, Dean did all this stuff, and I asked Dean to leave my house because I didn't really want the neighborhood to put up with what Dean had done to Chris and to others. I'm sure the other neighbors will come up with choice stories about Dean as well. But Dean's not welcome at my house. The lady that is still girlfriend with him is not allowed at my house because I don't want Dean anywhere near me because of what he is capable of doing and saying and thinking. It's not going to happen. That's my opinion about my friend's boyfriend. Is he's not coming to my house ever again. So, if you have any questions, you want to talk to me, yeah, Chris knows how to get a hold of me. Have a great day.
Good deal. I think it's off now. Let me see.